I decided to visit my daughter-in-law without calling. But when I saw my husband's car at her house, I realized that something was wrong. I quietly went to the window, and what I heard inside shocked my world. I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I remember that morning with cruel clarity. The kind of clarity that only comes when something inside you breaks for good. The sun was low, pale, and indifferent, spilling its light across the quiet street as I turned onto Claire's driveway. I hadn't called. I never did that sort of thing, but that morning I'd baked her favorite apple pie, and I thought, God, how naive of me. I thought it would be nice to surprise her, to be kind. Her little house looked picture perfect the way it always did. White fence, a porch swing, hanging flower pots. It should have felt comforting, but something was wrong before I even stopped the car. There, parked right beside the front steps, was Frank's silver SUV. My husband's. For a moment I didn't believe it. Maybe he'd lent it to someone. Maybe he'd dropped something off. But Frank never mentioned visiting Claire. Ever. My chest tightened. A strange, icy stillness spread through me. I sat in the car for a while, gripping the steering wheel, staring at that car as if staring long enough could make it disappear. Then I got out. Slowly, quietly. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, each sound too loud. I don't know what I expected to hear, but as I got closer, laughter floated from inside. Hers and his. I froze under the kitchen window, the one by the dining room where she usually had breakfast. The voices were soft, teasing, and then I heard Frank's laugh. Low, intimate, the one I hadn't heard directed at me in years. I should have walked away right then. I should have spared myself, but I couldn't. My body moved on its own, step by careful step, until I was standing right beneath the open window. Claire's voice came first. "You're late," she said, in that playful, almost scolding tone. "I thought maybe your wife was keeping you busy." Then Frank's chuckle. "Don't start, Claire. You know how careful we have to be. If your son ever finds out, we're done." Silence. Cold, brutal silence. The kind that echoes inside your head long after the words fade. My son, their son. The pie slipped from my hand. It hit the ground with a soft, wet thud, apples and crust scattering over the driveway. I didn't even flinch. All I could hear was the rushing in my ears, the sound of something collapsing inside me. I took one step back, then another, my breath shallow and uneven. My fingers trembled so badly I could barely reach for my car keys. Inside, I heard movement, chairs scraping, more laughter. Frank's voice again, warm, unguarded, a tone I hadn't heard in years. And then Claire said something I'll never forget. She'll never suspect. She trusts both of us. Both of us. I don't remember driving home. I must have, because hours later I found myself sitting in my kitchen, the clock ticking, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air. I was still wearing my coat. The pie tin was gone, my hands sticky with syrup. I stared at the wall, at the framed photos of our family, me, Frank, our son, and Claire. Her smile in that picture made my stomach twist. How many years had it been going on? How long had I been the fool at the center of their secret? At some point, I laughed. A short, dry sound that didn't feel like mine. The kind of laugh you give when there's no other reaction left in you. I went to the sink and splashed water on my face, but the woman in the mirror didn't look like me anymore. Her eyes were red, her lips pressed tight, the corners of her mouth trembling. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. By evening, I'd convinced myself that maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe I'd misheard. Maybe they were talking about something else. Anything else. But deep down, I already knew. You can't mistake the sound of betrayal when it's spoken by the man you've shared your life with. I sat there until the sun went down, the house dimming around me. Every sound outside, the barking dogs, the passing cars, the creak of the porch, felt foreign, like I was living inside someone else's story. At midnight, Frank came home. He kissed my forehead, smelled like her perfume, gardenia and smoke. He smiled like nothing had happened. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft, almost tender. And that was the moment I knew. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't even afraid. "I'm fine," I said, steady, my heart thudding so hard I thought he could hear it. He nodded, poured himself a drink, and turned on the TV. Just like any other night. But for me, the world had shifted. Everything I thought was safe, real, and true had become a lie I was forced to inhabit. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his slow, careless breathing beside me. My hands were cold, my chest hollow. The words echoed over and over in my head. "If your son ever finds out, we're done." By dawn, I made a silent promise to myself. I didn't know how or when, but they would both regret underestimating me. And for the first time in my life, I stopped being afraid of the truth. The morning after I found out about Frank and Claire, the house felt different. Too quiet. Too clean. Too full of ghosts that hadn't died yet. The air itself seemed heavy, like it carried the weight of everything I didn't want to face. Frank left early, as he always did, muttering something about meetings. I watched from the window as his car pulled out of the driveway. The same silver SUV I'd seen parked outside Claire's house. My reflection in the glass looked pale, distant. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. When the door shut, I finally exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was raw, jagged. My hands shook as I poured myself a cup of coffee, though I didn't drink it. I couldn't taste anything. I sat at the table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 25 years, and all I could think was how many times he must have lied while smiling across from me. At first, I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. There was just a dull ache behind my eyes, a slow, burning pressure that refused to break. So instead, I sat still and started counting. Counting the lies, counting the years, counting everything I'd given up to make his life comfortable. I remembered the early days, when we had nothing, when I worked double shifts while he built his career. How I cheered for him when he got his promotion. How I believed his late nights at the office were just that, work. I remembered how proud I was when our son married Claire, how I thought she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. I laughed bitterly at that one. The clock ticked on. 10, 11, noon. I didn't move. My whole life, the one I'd built brick by brick, meal by meal, sacrifice by sacrifice, was suddenly a house of cards. When my son called that afternoon, I almost answered. I almost told him everything, but my voice failed me. I couldn't be the one to destroy his world, not yet. So I let it ring until it stopped. Later, I walked through the house, touching everything. The picture frames, the books, the faded curtains. They all felt foreign now, like props in a story that had ended long ago. I stood in our bedroom, looking at the unmade bed, and something inside me hardened. Frank had built his world on my trust. Claire had built hers on my kindness, and both of them had mistaken my silence for weakness. That realization came slowly, like the first breath after drowning. Painful, but necessary. I sat down at my desk, opened a blank notebook, and began to write. Not a letter, not a confession, a plan. It started small. A list of what was his, what was ours, what I could take. Bank accounts, documents, business records. I wasn't thinking of revenge then, not yet. I was thinking of survival, of reclaiming what was mine before they stripped it all away. By evening, the anger had started to rise. Not loud, not wild, but steady, controlled, like a fire that had finally found its air. When Frank came home that night, I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read. He kissed my cheek again, mechanical, thoughtless. I didn't flinch this time. I just watched him. Every move, every gesture, the way he avoided my eyes, the way he smiled too easily. "Long day?" he asked. "The longest," I said quietly. He laughed, not hearing what I meant. When he went upstairs, I stayed behind, listening to the rhythm of his footsteps. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a stage. And he didn't realize the curtain had already lifted on his final act. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the lights from passing cars slide across the walls. My thoughts were sharp, precise. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in emotion. I was thinking clearly. If I confronted them now, they'd deny everything. They'd twist the truth until I looked like the crazy one. I knew Frank. He was a master of manipulation. And Claire? She'd play innocent, pretend she was the victim. No, I couldn't act on impulse. Not yet. I needed proof. I needed to be smarter than both of them. Around 3 in the morning, I closed the notebook. The first version of my plan was done. Crude, incomplete, but real. It gave me something to hold on to, a purpose beyond the pain. I looked around the room. The photos, the furniture, the little life I'd once been proud of. All of it looked smaller now, cheaper. I whispered to the empty air. "You thought I'd stay silent? Watch me." It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. When dawn came, I brewed fresh coffee, showered, dressed, and put on makeup for the first time in weeks. I looked in the mirror again. My eyes were still tired, but there was something new behind them. Focus. I didn't know exactly where the path would lead, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let them walk away untouched. Frank thought he was clever. Claire thought she was safe, but I was done being the woman they could fool. I made my first appointment with a lawyer 2 days later. His office was in the old part of town, the kind of place that still smelled like paper and wood polish. I sat in the waiting room, my hands folded neatly on my lap, pretending to read a magazine I couldn't see. My heart beat hard, but my face was calm. When they called my name, I stood up slowly, like someone walking into their own trial. The lawyer's name was Michael. Late 40s, kind eyes, the kind of man who didn't interrupt. He listened carefully as I spoke, first haltingly, then in a rush. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. I told him about the marriage, the years, the distance, the growing silence. I told him I wanted to file for divorce. He nodded thoughtfully. "Is there someone else?" The question hit me like a slap. I hesitated, then said softly, "Yes." He didn't ask for details. Instead, he started talking about property, accounts, legal rights, cold, practical words that should have comforted me but didn't. I realized how little I actually knew about our finances. Frank had always handled everything. I trusted him completely. That trust now felt like another kind of betrayal. Michael asked for bank statements, property deeds, tax records. I promised I'd find them. When I left the office, I felt both lighter and heavier. The first step had been taken, but now the ground beneath me felt less stable than ever. On the drive home, I caught myself gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. It hit me then. What if I couldn't do this? What if he'd hidden everything, moved the money, made sure I'd be left with nothing? For a brief moment, fear took over. It whispered that I was too old, too tired. too late. But then, just as quickly, something else rose inside me. A kind of stubborn defiance I didn't know I still had. At home, I went straight to Frank's study. The door was locked, as always. He'd never trusted me in there, though he claimed it was just work stuff. That night, after he fell asleep, I tried the spare key I'd kept hidden behind the photo frame in the hallway. It still worked. Inside, the air smelled of stale cologne and expensive whiskey. His desk was spotless, too spotless. I turned on the lamp and began searching. Folders, contracts, receipts. I didn't even know what I was looking for until I found it. A printed email chain between Frank and Claire. At first, it looked like business correspondence. Then one line caught my eye. The transfer needs to go through by the end of the quarter, or your husband will notice. Your husband, my son. My throat went dry. I read it again and again until the words blurred. It wasn't just an affair. They were moving money. My son's money. For the first time, my fear turned into something sharper. Purpose. I spent the next few days gathering everything I could. Quietly. Carefully. I photographed documents, copied emails, took screenshots, stored them on a hidden drive. Every night, Frank slept beside me, snoring softly, while I sat awake in the glow of my phone, watching the pieces of his lies come together. Each discovery made me steadier, calmer. It was strange, almost frightening, how quickly pain could turn into focus. A week later, Michael called. "Mrs. Walker," he said, "I've reviewed the papers you sent. There's a chance your husband's company has been used to move personal assets. If we can prove that, you'll be entitled to a much larger settlement." I thanked him, but my mind was already racing. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth. That night, Frank noticed something. He looked at me across the dinner table, his fork pausing midair. "You're quiet lately," he said. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Perfect." He tilted his head, studying me. "You've been going out a lot, shopping, meeting someone?" I almost laughed. "Don't worry, Frank, I'm not the one sneaking around." He chuckled uneasily, pretending not to hear the edge in my voice. But I saw it, the flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He knew something had changed. The next morning, he left his phone on the kitchen counter while he took a call outside. I glanced at the screen and saw a text preview. "Be careful. She's acting strange." Claire? He deleted it when he came back in, but it was too late. They were watching me now, testing me. Fine, let them. The following day, I met with Michael again and handed him everything. Emails, screenshots, bank slips. He looked at me with quiet admiration. "You've done your homework," he said. I smiled faintly. "You have no idea." As I left his office, I felt a new steadiness settle inside me. The fear hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting. I was planning. They thought I was just a wounded wife stumbling in shock. But while they were busy watching me, I was already 2 steps ahead, and deep down, I could tell they were starting to sense it. The day I filed for divorce was colder than I expected. The kind of gray, windless morning that makes everything feel like it's holding its breath. I remember walking up the courthouse steps. Papers clutched to my chest, my pulse steady but slow, as if even my heart knew this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about war. When I handed the documents to the clerk, she stamped them without a glance. Just another transaction. For her, it was routine. For me, it was the end of an entire life. As I walked back to my car, I felt something almost like relief. Not peace. Not yet. But relief. The first stone had been thrown. The silence had finally broken. By the time I got home, Frank was already waiting. His SUV was parked crookedly in the driveway, engines still running. He was standing by the porch, phone in hand, his jaw tight. I knew he'd already gotten the call. "So it's true," he said, the moment I stepped out of the car. His voice wasn't angry. Not yet. but sharp, cold, calculating. You filed? I met his eyes. Yes. He laughed once, a short, humorless sound. Without even talking to me first? Jesus, Marilyn, after all these years. After all these years, I interrupted, you think I'd still be willing to talk? The look that crossed his face was something I hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not fear, but irritation. Like my pain was an inconvenience. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake. You don't know what you're getting into. Oh, I think I do. For a long moment, he just stared at me, trying to read my face. Then his tone shifted, softer, almost patronizing. Look, if this is about Claire, I felt the blood drain from my face. Don't, I whispered. Don't say her name to me. He stopped, caught himself, then shrugged like it didn't matter. Fine. I'll call the lawyer tomorrow. We'll make this clean. No need to turn it into a spectacle. But there was fear behind his calmness now, a flicker of something uncertain. That night, he didn't come home. The next day, Claire called. I didn't answer the first 2 times, but she kept trying until I finally picked up. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. Marilyn, can we talk? There's nothing to talk about. Please, she said, a tremor just beneath her calm tone. I know things look bad, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You betrayed my son. You betrayed me. That's all I need to know. Wait! I hung up. An hour later, a text arrived from Frank. You're making this worse for everyone. Stop before you regret it. Regret it. The words lingered, a warning, a threat. That evening, I checked my email and found an anonymous message. No subject line, no signature, just one sentence. If you don't want your son to find out everything, you'll drop the case. I sat there, staring at the screen, pulse pounding. They were getting desperate. Good. Desperation meant they were losing control. Still, a tremor of fear crept in. They weren't just liars anymore. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals bite. I printed the email and added it to the growing folder in my desk. Evidence, proof, every piece mattered. The next morning, I went to see Michael again. When I showed him the message, his brow furrowed. Do you think it came from your husband? I know it did, I said, or from her. He nodded slowly. Keep everything, every threat, every call. We'll use it. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this. But the reprieve didn't last long. 2 nights later, they came, together. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock. When I opened the door, they were both standing there. Frank in his pressed suit, Claire beside him, her face painted with an expression that tried to look apologetic and failed. Marilyn, Frank said smoothly, we just want to talk. I'm not interested. Claire took a step forward, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. Please, you've misunderstood everything. I never wanted this. Wanted what? I cut in sharply. My husband? My family? Or the money you thought you could steal? Her face hardened, the mask slipping for just a second. Frank raised a hand. Enough. We're not here to fight. He glanced toward the street, lowering his voice. You're making this public, Marilyn. That's not going to end well for anyone. Especially for you, I said quietly. Something cold flickered in his eyes. You think you're untouchable? You're not. You've lived off my money for decades. You won't survive this on your own. I almost smiled. Watch me. For a long, silent moment, none of us moved. Then Claire touched his arm. Let's go, she whispered. She's not worth it. They turned and left. But as they walked down the driveway, I caught Claire's parting glance. A sharp, venomous glare that said more than any words could. They would be back that night. I barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every car passing outside made my chest tighten. But beneath the fear, something else had begun to grow. Resolve. They had come to intimidate me, Instead, they'd shown me exactly how afraid they were. For the first time since that day at the window, I felt control return to my hands. It was small, fragile, but real. In the morning, I called Michael again. "We move forward," I told him. "No delays." He didn't question me. After I hung up, I went out onto the porch. The air was cold, clean. I could still smell the faint trace of their perfume lingering in the wind, gardenia and whiskey. I closed my eyes and breathed it in, not with pain, but with something close to satisfaction. Let them watch, let them threaten, let them try to scare me. They had started this war. Now I would finish it. The call came 3 days after they showed up at my door. This time it wasn't threats. It was sweetness. Calculated, poisonous sweetness. Frank's name flashed on my phone, and for a moment I almost didn't answer. But then I thought, let's see what performance he's prepared this time. His voice was gentle, familiar, warm in that practiced way he used to talk to clients he was trying to manipulate. "Marilyn," he said softly, "I've been thinking about us." I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch, long enough for him to fill it. "I know things got out of hand," he continued. "I made mistakes, big ones. But maybe we don't have to destroy each other over this. We've built too much together." He paused, and I heard the faint clink of glass. Whiskey. His courage. "Let me take you to dinner," he said. "We can talk. Just talk." I almost laughed. "Talk?" I said. "Frank, the time for talking ended the day you took her to my son's bed." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "You don't know everything," he said quickly. "Claire's been confused. She doesn't think straight sometimes. It wasn't what you think." "Then tell me what it was." He hesitated. "It was complicated." That was all he could offer. Complicated. The kind of word cowards hide behind when they don't want to face the filth of what they've done. "Dinner won't change anything," I said. "We're done." When I hung up, my hands were steady. For the first time, his voice didn't shake me. It bored me. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the sunset from the porch. The sky burned orange and red, fading into a deep violet. I thought of all the nights I'd spent waiting for him to come home, of all the excuses I'd swallowed, of how small I'd let myself become just to keep the peace. Never again. The next morning, a letter arrived. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. Claire's. "Marilyn," it began, "I can't sleep knowing how much pain I've caused you. Please, can we meet? I need to explain." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and put it in the drawer with the other lies. That afternoon, she showed up anyway. I saw her through the window, standing on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, trying to look fragile. I let her knock. Once, twice, 3 times. Then I opened the door. "Marilyn," she said, her voice trembling, "please don't shut me out." "I told you before, there's nothing to discuss." Her eyes filled with tears, too fast, too perfect. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Frank said, he said he'd end things with you, that you'd understand. I felt something cold twist inside me. "End things with me?" I repeated slowly. "So it was planned." She froze, realizing her mistake. Then her mask slipped back into place. "No, I just mean..." He was confused. We both were. "Confused," I said flatly. "Seems like a lot of that going around." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If this goes public, your son will find out. Do you really want that? He'll hate both of us. It'll destroy him." There it was, the real reason for her visit. "You're not worried about my son," I said quietly. "You're worried about yourself." Tears welled again, but this time I saw the calculation behind them. "Please, Marilyn, we can fix this. We can all move on. You don't have to do this." I stared at her for a long moment. Then I smiled. A small, almost kind smile that even I didn't recognize. "Claire," I said softly, "you're right. I don't have to. I want to." Her face paled. I'm done protecting people who don't deserve it, I continued. So if you're smart, you'll stop coming here. The next time you knock, it won't be me answering. Her jaw tightened. The tears stopped as quickly as they'd started. You think you're winning, she hissed. You're not. You'll lose everything. I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper. I already did. That's what makes me dangerous. She left without another word. When the door closed behind her, I let out a slow breath. The silence that followed was thick, but different this time. No longer suffocating. Calming. That night, I started a new list. Not of losses, but of proofs. Bank transfers, dates, times. I called an old friend who worked in accounting and asked for help tracing a few transactions. She didn't ask questions, just said she'd look into it. Every piece of evidence I gathered made me feel lighter. My grief was gone now, replaced by precision. I didn't even feel angry anymore, just focused. Frank and Claire stopped calling after that. I could sense them retreating, whispering, watching from a distance. Good. Let them wonder. Let them feel the same unease that had lived inside me for weeks. I spent my evenings in silence, my days in motion, sorting files, meeting with lawyers, building the foundation of something they'd never see coming. There was a calmness to it, almost like ritual. No crying, no shaking, no shouting. Just the steady, quiet rhythm of a woman reclaiming her life inch by inch. One night, as I sat at my desk, the clock ticking softly beside me, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of them, not of what was coming, not even of being alone. They had taken everything that used to define me, wife, mother, peacekeeper, and in doing so, they had created someone entirely new, someone they couldn't manipulate, someone they should have feared from the beginning. The first person I told was Elaine. We hadn't spoken in years, life, distance, all the usual excuses. But one morning, as I was sorting through another pile of papers for Michael, I saw her name in my contacts. Something inside me said, call her. Elaine had been my college roommate once, my maid of honor, the person who'd seen me before Frank reshaped my world into something quiet and small. She picked up on the third ring, her voice still soft and low, but laced with a strength I'd forgotten. Marilyn, she said, is that really you? I didn't mean to cry, but I did. The sound of her voice cracked something open. She drove over that same afternoon. When I opened the door, she looked at me for a long time before saying a word. Then she just reached out and hugged me. I hadn't realized how much I needed that simple human thing. We sat at the kitchen table for hours. I told her everything. The affair, the lies, the money. Every detail spilled out like poison I'd been holding too long. She didn't interrupt, didn't pity me. She just listened, her eyes steady, her hand resting on mine. When I finished, she said quietly, you know, I went through the same thing. I blinked. What? My husband, she said. 5 years ago, I thought I'd die when I found out. But I didn't. I started again. I stared at her, the words barely sinking in. How? She smiled faintly. By realizing that the worst thing had already happened. Once you lose everything you were afraid to lose, you're finally free. Her calmness wasn't rehearsed. It was real. The kind that comes only after surviving fire. That night, after she left, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not revenge, clarity. The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet, sunlight creeping across the floorboards. I made coffee, opened the window, and for the first time in months, I breathed without feeling pain in my chest. I started attending a small women's group Elaine ran on Saturdays. Not therapy, exactly, but a kind of gathering for those rebuilding their lives. We sat in a circle in her backyard, sharing stories over coffee and homemade muffins. Some had been cheated on, others left, others simply forgotten by men who promised forever. But there was no bitterness there, just recognition. Every story, every scar they revealed gave me strength. I wasn't alone anymore. They called it the table. Simple, but sacred. I didn't talk much at first. I just listened. Until one afternoon, when Elaine asked gently, "Marilyn, what do you want now? Not what you've lost. What do you want?" The question startled me. I hadn't thought of wanting anything in months. I looked at her, then at the women around me, and said, "I want to stop being someone they can hurt." There was a silence, and then quiet nods. "That's a start," Elaine said. For the first time since the affair, I felt light. Not happy, not yet, but clean, like something dark had been washed off me. But peace never lasts long when people like Frank and Claire feel it slipping away. The first sign came in the form of flowers, a huge bouquet left on my doorstep, white lilies and red roses. No card, just a ribbon tied perfectly, too perfectly. Then came the text. "We'd like to see you, just to talk. No lawyers." I didn't respond. 2 days later, they showed up again. This time, I didn't open the door. I watched through the curtain as Frank knocked, smiled at the doorbell camera, pretending for the neighbors that everything was fine. Claire stood beside him, her eyes hidden behind sunglasses. After a minute, Frank spoke loudly enough for the microphone to catch his words. "We're just trying to make peace, Marilyn. We don't want to fight anymore." Peace. The word tasted like ash. I stayed silent. After they left, I watched the footage again. Claire's hand on his arm. The way she glanced up at the camera. Not angry, not scared. Calculating. That evening, my phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. A male voice spoke. Calm, professional. "Mrs. Walker, this is Detective Hayes. We received a report claiming you've been harassing your daughter-in-law." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "What?" "The complaint came through an anonymous call," he continued. "We're required to follow up." Of course, their next move. I thanked him, explained the situation as calmly as I could, and offered to bring my lawyer into the conversation. When the call ended, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from fury. They'd tried to ruin me emotionally. Now they were coming for my reputation. That night, I drove to Elaine's. I told her everything. She listened in silence, then said, "They're escalating because you've stopped playing their game. That means you're winning. But you need to be careful now. They'll use anything to make you look unstable." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll give them nothing to use," she smiled. "Good, because you're not the same woman who found that car in the driveway." On the drive home, her words stayed with me. I realized she was right. I wasn't that woman anymore. The shock had burned away. The grief had hardened into something unbreakable. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt fear again. Small, distant, but still there. And yet, instead of weakening me, it fueled me, like oxygen to the flame. They thought showing up at my door would make me crumble. But every knock, every threat, every desperate move only made me stronger. I knew now what they feared most. Not the truth, but the woman who was finally ready to speak it. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday. I remember because I spent the Monday before it cleaning the house. Not because it needed it, but because I needed to feel like something in my life could still be set in order. The courthouse loomed in my mind all day, a place where everything that had been festering in the shadows would finally see daylight. When I woke that morning, I felt calm in a way that frightened me. My body moved automatically. Coffee, shower, dress, papers in my bag. I looked in the mirror once before leaving. There were lines on my face I didn't remember earning, but my eyes were steady. At the courthouse, Michael met me at the steps. "You ready?" he asked. "Yes," I said. And for the first time since the day by Claire's window, I meant it. Inside, the room was cold, fluorescent. Frank was already there, immaculate as ever, charcoal suit, expensive watch, the air of a man who believed rules existed to protect him. Claire sat beside him, hair perfectly styled, face painted into a portrait of innocence. When she saw me, her lips curled in that polite little smile she used to wear at family dinners. I didn't return it. The hearing began. Standard procedure, the judge said. Property, assets, spousal claims. But when Michael stood and began to speak, the tone shifted. He wasn't talking about property. He was talking about money transfers, irregularities, forged signatures, and then he mentioned names, Frank's, Claire's. Frank's smile faltered. Michael placed a folder on the table and said, Your Honor, these are copies of bank statements showing funds diverted from the joint business account into a private one controlled by Mrs. Walker's daughter-in-law, Claire Henderson. A murmur went through the room. Claire's hand shot to her mouth. That's a lie, she whispered. The judge looked up. You'll have your turn, Miss Henderson. Michael continued, methodical, patient. We also have emails between Mr. Walker and Ms. Henderson confirming their coordination in these transfers, along with evidence suggesting a personal relationship between the two. Now the silence was absolute. Frank shifted in his seat, trying to summon the charm that had saved him 1,000 times before. This is ridiculous, he said smoothly. My wife is confused. She's been under stress and— Under stress? I said, my voice cutting through his. Yes, Frank. I've been under stress. The kind caused by watching my husband sleep with my son's wife and steal from his own child. The judge called for order, but I barely heard him. Frank's composure cracked, a flicker of rage slipping through his polished veneer. Claire turned on him, whispering furiously, her mask splintering with every word. I told you this would happen, she hissed. You said she'd never find out. Quiet, Frank snapped. You're making it worse. Oh, I'm making it worse? She shot back, her voice rising. You're the one who told me to move the money. The judge's gavel struck the bench. Enough! The room fell silent again, but it was too late. The damage was done. Every word they'd just spoken hung in the air like smoke, visible, undeniable. Michael leaned toward me, whispering, That's all we needed. For the rest of the session, they stumbled through their explanations. Frank tried charm, then denial, then anger. Claire cried, then accused, then broke entirely, her voice cracking into hysterics. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The truth was doing my work for me. When it was over, the judge adjourned, saying the evidence would be reviewed, but his tone made it clear. The decision was already made. Outside, the air was bright and sharp. Frank followed me out, his face pale, jaw clenched. You think this is over, he said quietly. You've humiliated me. You've humiliated yourself. Our son will hate you for this. I turned to face him, my voice low but steady. No, Frank. He'll hate you for making me do it. For a moment, he looked like he might hit me. Then he just laughed, a hollow, broken sound. You've always been colder than you pretend, he said. I met his gaze. You taught me. He left then, marching toward the car where Claire was waiting, her mascara streaked, her hand trembling as she lit a cigarette. I stood there a long while, watching them drive away. I felt no triumph, no relief, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the air is too still and you're not sure what's left standing. When Michael came out, he said, You did well in there. I didn't do anything, I said. They did. That evening, I went home, made myself tea, and sat by the window where it had all started months ago, the place where I'd first overheard the voices that shattered everything. The same window, the same world, but I was no longer the same woman. The phone rang once, then again. I didn't answer. Outside, the last light faded, and the reflection in the glass looked almost unfamiliar. Someone harder, quieter, but alive. I thought about Elaine's words. Once you lose everything you were afraid to lose, you're finally free. Now I understood. Tomorrow would bring consequences. For them, for me, for everyone. But tonight, the silence was mine. And it had never felt so powerful. It took 3 weeks for the judgment to be finalized. 3 long, deliberate weeks of waiting, signing, reading through statements, answering questions. Every morning, I woke up before sunrise, made coffee, and stared at the thin gray line of dawn through the kitchen window. Every morning, I told myself the same thing. Don't look back. When the letter came, it was thinner than I expected. No ceremony, no drama, just black words on white paper. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Marilyn Walker. I read it 3 times, each one slower than the last. Assets divided. Accounts frozen. Claire's name removed from every corporate document. Frank ordered to pay restitution for misappropriated funds. All the elegant language that, stripped down, meant one thing. I had won. But victory didn't feel like I'd imagined. It wasn't loud or bright, it was quiet, heavy, a kind of stillness that pressed into my chest and made it hard to breathe. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat outside. The garden was still. The air smelled of rain. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a train. Life going on. Indifferent. Endless. The phone rang again and again that night. First unknown numbers, then Frank's, then finally my son's. I couldn't answer. Not yet. The next morning, the headlines hit. Local business scandal. Names spelled out for everyone to see. Photos of Frank looking hollow-eyed, shoulders bent. Claire beside him, hiding her face from the cameras. The press was merciless. Their faces were plastered everywhere. The perfect family turned grotesque. By noon, the company had announced Frank's voluntary resignation. Claire's name disappeared from every record. Lawyers circled them like vultures. Friends stopped calling. The neighbors avoided their house. I thought I'd feel satisfaction. Maybe I did. But it wasn't the sharp, vindictive thrill I'd imagined months ago. It was quieter, cleaner. A sense that justice, however late, had finally arrived. Still, there were moments, small, human moments, that hurt in ways I hadn't expected. I'd see Frank's handwriting on an old grocery list, his coffee mug still on the shelf, memories that refused to vanish with the court's verdict. But every time the ache came, I reminded myself, pain was temporary, dignity was permanent. One evening, Michael called. "It's official," he said. "The property transfer went through. You have full ownership of the house, and they have nothing left to contest." I thanked him, though the words caught in my throat. After the call, I sat for a long time in silence. The house felt both emptier and safer than it had in years. No footsteps upstairs. No lies humming beneath the sound of the television. Just quiet. A few days later, I saw them, by accident. I was coming out of the grocery store when I spotted Frank across the parking lot. His hair had gone grayer, his suit hung loose on his shoulders. Claire was with him, wearing sunglasses though it was cloudy. They were arguing, sharp and low. He saw me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he turned away. I stood there, watching, as they climbed into an old sedan, not the shiny SUV he'd once been so proud of, and drove off. I felt nothing, no pity, no triumph, just finality. When I got home, I cleaned out the last of his things. Every tie, every photo, every relic of the life we'd shared. I boxed them up and left them by the curb. The garbage truck came the next morning and took it all away. The house looked larger without him in it, lighter. A few days later, my son called again. This time, I answered. He didn't ask for explanations. He already knew. The papers, the stories. They'd told him enough. His voice was quiet, wounded. "Mom," he said, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't." I replied. Just live your life. Better than we did. There was a pause, long and heavy. Then, softly, I will. After that, we didn't speak about it again. Weeks passed. The world moved on. The scandal faded, replaced by newer, shinier tragedies. But for them, for Frank and Claire, the fallout lingered. They sold the house. Friends vanished. Frank's health began to fail. I heard whispers, unpaid debts, legal troubles, a foreclosure. Claire was seen leaving town alone not long after. Some nights I wondered where she went. Then I'd stop myself. It didn't matter. Justice, once done, doesn't need an audience. And if they expected forgiveness, they would wait forever. That autumn, I took a trip to the coast. Alone. The ocean was colder than I remembered, gray and endless, but beautiful. I stood at the edge of the surf, the wind biting my face, and whispered to the waves, "It's done." The sound of the sea swallowed the words, carrying them away. When I drove home that night, I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. They had been erased from my life completely. Not by rage, not by revenge, but by absence. They had wanted to destroy me. Instead, they destroyed themselves. And as the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the world in white silence, I realized something simple and final. I hadn't just survived them, I had outlived them. A year passed. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime. Sometimes like a week. Seasons turned, one after another, smoothing over the sharp edges of everything that had come before. The woman who once flinched at every phone ring, who woke in the middle of the night replaying every word, was gone. Now my mornings started with the sound of the ocean. I'd sold the old house in the suburbs and moved into a small cottage by the water, just enough space for me, a garden, and a desk by the window. The air here tasted different. Salt and wind, not memory and dust. I built routines. I cooked. I wrote. Elaine convinced me to start a small cooking blog, The Quiet Table. It was supposed to be about recipes, but somehow it became something else. Letters to women I would never meet. I didn't write about betrayal. I wrote about rebuilding, about the slow work of learning to live without waiting for someone's approval. The readers came, quietly at first, then more of them. Messages filled my inbox, strangers thanking me for helping them feel less alone. I always smiled at that. I hadn't realized until then that even silence could have an audience. I still heard about Frank and Claire from time to time. Small towns don't keep secrets, even after the headlines fade. Frank lived alone now in a rented apartment downtown. His business was gone, his health failing. He'd had a heart attack, someone said. No one visited. His friends had melted away once the money did. Claire, for her part, had left town months earlier. There were rumors, an affair with another man, a new job that never lasted, debts she couldn't pay. She'd been seen at a motel outside of Chicago, hair unwashed, talking to herself in the parking lot. I didn't wish her well, but I didn't wish her harm either. I simply wished her gone, from my thoughts, my life, my story. Some nights, when I sat by the window writing, I'd think about the woman I used to be, the one who baked a pie and went to her daughter-in-law's house out of kindness. I pitied her a little, but I loved her too. She had to exist so that I could become this version of myself. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned itself out long ago. What remained was something quieter and infinitely stronger. Peace. The kind that comes from knowing you survived your own destruction and came back sharper, cleaner, alive. One evening, I walked along the beach at low tide. The air was cool, the sky bruised with the colors of dusk. I watched the waves slide in and retreat, again and again, as if the ocean itself was practicing the art of letting go. I thought of Frank's last words to me. "You'll regret this." He was wrong. I regretted nothing. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small silver key, the last thing I still had from the old house. I turned it over in my palm once, then threw it into the surf. It disappeared instantly. No drama, no echo, just gone. That night, I wrote my final entry for the blog. There will come a day when you will wake up and realize you no longer need to forgive the people who hurt you. You won't hate them. You won't love them. You'll just stop thinking about them. That is the real freedom. Not revenge, not justice, just absence. A life finally unshared with those who tried to break it. The post went viral, but I didn't read the comments. I didn't need to. The words weren't for anyone else. They were for me. Winter came again. The waves grew wilder, the nights longer. I liked it that way. I'd sit by the fire with a blanket around my shoulders, the house silent except for the wind against the windows. Silence no longer frightened me. It was my reward. Sometimes Elaine would visit. We'd drink tea, laugh about the past, and sit in companionable quiet. She told me once, "You know, you look younger now." I smiled. Maybe I am. The truth was, I felt it. Not in my body, but somewhere deeper. In that still, resilient part of me that had finally stopped waiting to be hurt again. One morning, as I stood outside watching the gulls sweep low over the waves, I realized that I was happy. Not the wild, fleeting happiness of youth, but the calm kind that lives in your bones. I whispered to the wind, "You thought you broke me." Then softly, almost like a prayer, "But you can't break what finally became whole." And the sea, endless and forgiving, answered with its roar. Frank and Claire were gone now. Two ghosts swallowed by their own choices. Their lives had unraveled completely, as if fate itself had refused to let them escape the weight of what they'd done. But I had escaped. I was free. And as the sun rose over the gray water, spilling gold across the horizon, I realized it was the same sun that had once watched me fall apart. Only now, it was watching me begin again. The story that started with betrayal ended here, in stillness, in peace, in the quiet victory of a woman who refused to stay broken. I turned, walked back inside, and closed the door gently behind me. The tide kept rolling in, and I never looked back again.